everyone knew the rules at Maplewood High. If Dallas Hayes picked you as his target, you kept your head down and took it. No one ever fought back. No one ever challenged him. It wasn't just about him being the son of a wealthy family or the fact that his uncle sat on the school board. It wasn't just that he was captain of the football team, or that he always had his pack of goons flanking him like bodyguards. It was that Dallas had been untouchable for as long as anyone could remember. Which is why, when Layla Carter walked into the hallway that morning, every single person who saw what was about to happen made the same decision. They were not getting involved. Layla hadn't been thinking about Dallas Hayes. She had a physics test in third period, and she still wasn't sure she understood rotational inertia well enough to survive it. That was the only thing on her mind as she weaved through the crowd of students, mentally running through formulas. Then she saw him. He was standing right in the middle of the hallway, arms crossed, that same smug expression he always had when he was about to ruin someone's day. Layla didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She should have. Because before she could even get past him, before she could pretend not to see him like so many others had before, Dallas blocked her path completely. A pause. The hallway didn't go silent, but the energy shifted. Conversations became quieter. Movements became slower. No one wanted to get caught staring, but no one wanted to miss what was coming next. "Where do you think you're going?" He said it in going. He said it in that way of his, mocking, casual, like he was letting her know exactly how little he thought of her. Layla didn't answer. She had learned a long time ago that silence was usually the best response. People like Dallas didn't actually care what you said. They just wanted a reaction. He smirked, like he had already won. She could feel the weight of the hallway pressing down on her. The way people had stopped walking, how they were pretending to be busy with their lockers, but were really just waiting to see what would happen next. She should have ignored him. She should have backed down. But that day, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the smirk on his face made her stomach turn. Maybe it was the way she had spent her entire life pretending not to hear comments like his, pretending not to notice the way people like him looked at people like her. Maybe it was just exhaustion, plain and simple. Either way, the decision had already been made before she even realized it. Move. It was the wrong answer. Dallas tilted his head like he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Then his smirk widened. "Oh, I know. You didn't just say that." The shift in the crowd was immediate. There was an unwritten rule at Maplewood. You did not talk back to Dallas Hayes. Layla had just broken it. Dallas took a step forward. Not enough to touch her, not yet, but enough to make a point. Enough to remind her that he was bigger, stronger, and that this was his school, not hers. "You think you belong here?" The words weren't new. She had heard them before, spoken by different people in different ways. She had spent years ignoring them. But today, she didn't. She met his gaze, steady, unflinching. And that was his mistake. Because if he had just walked away, if he had just let it go, what happened next wouldn't have been the talk of the entire school for weeks. Instead, he shoved her. It wasn't hard, not enough to really hurt. But that wasn't the point. The point was to humiliate, to remind her and everyone watching that she wasn't supposed to fight back. Gasps rippled through the hallway. Someone whispered, "Oh, damn!" A few phones slid out of pockets. Layla didn't move. Dallas took it as an invitation. "Go ahead," he taunted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Run and cry. Tell a teacher. See if anyone cares." Then he shoved her again. A mistake. A huge mistake. Because before he even knew what was happening, before anyone watching could react, Layla moved. And in a blink, the school's biggest bully was no longer standing. He was flat on his back. For the first time in his life, Dallas Hayes wasn't standing above someone. The hallway was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from shock, but the kind that comes before an explosion. A moment stretched so tight that it felt like the whole school was holding its breath. Then it happened. Laughter. A single burst at first, then more. Clapping. Someone whistled. A voice from the back yelled, "Oh, shh!" Phones shot up, screens glowing as dozens of students hit record. Dallas didn't move. Not at first. He was still on the ground, staring at the ceiling like he couldn't process what had just happened, like his brain refused to accept that this had happened to him. Layla didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She adjusted her bag, turned, and stepped over him. And that was what really set the school on fire. Because knocking Dallas Hayes on his ass was one thing. It was shocking, sure, but it was possible. Stepping over him? Like he was nothing? Like he didn't even exist? That was legendary. The hallway erupted. People high-fived, laughed, shoved each other in disbelief. Dude, she wrecked him. I didn't even know she could fight. She's a freaking ninja, bro. Dallas heard every single word. He pushed himself up, face flushed, fingers curling into fists. He looked around, scanning the crowd, searching for someone, anyone, who wasn't laughing. He found no one. And that was unacceptable. By the time Layla reached her next class, the video was already on social media. It spread fast. By lunchtime, the entire school had seen it. By the time the final bell rang, it was on Instagram, TikTok, even Twitter. The caption changed depending on who posted it, but the message stayed the same. Rich kid gets destroyed at elite school. Bully gets a taste of his own medicine. She ended his whole career. The views skyrocketed. Comments poured in. People loved it. Except for one person. Dallas Hayes was livid. For years, he had built his name, his reputation. He had made sure people feared him, respected him. His entire identity at Maplewood High was based on power, on being untouchable. And now? Now he was a joke, a meme. Layla wasn't just some random girl who stood up to him anymore. She was famous. People he had never even spoken to were suddenly sitting with her at lunch, asking her questions, laughing at him. He had never felt this before. This kind of humiliation. He had to fix it. There was only one way to do that. He had to make Layla Carter regret ever embarrassing him. The whispers started before Layla even walked into school the next morning. People weren't just talking about her anymore. They were watching. Some looked at her like she was a superhero, like she had done something impossible and changed the entire balance of power overnight. Others looked nervous, like they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because if there was one thing everyone knew about Dallas Hayes, it was that he never lost. And when he did, he made sure you paid for it. Layla should have seen it coming. Maybe if she hadn't been so busy dodging high fives in the hallway, she would have noticed the way people fell silent when she walked past. The way certain students gave her quick, sidelong glances before looking away. The way Dallas and his crew were nowhere to be seen, but their absence felt heavier than their presence ever had. She should have known. So when her phone buzzed at lunch with a text from an unknown number, she barely hesitated before opening it. Meet me at the gym after school. No cameras. Let's settle this. She didn't need to ask who it was. She didn't need to think about whether or not she'd go. She already knew her answer. The gym was quieter than she expected. No buzzing fluorescent lights, no sounds of basketballs hitting the floor or sneakers squeaking against polished wood, just silence. And Dallas. She had barely stepped inside when the doors shut behind her. She knew before she even turned around, he wasn't alone. 3 figures stood behind him, Hunter, Mason, and Tyler, his crew, the guys who followed him around, who laughed at his jokes, who threw their weight around to keep the school exactly the way Dallas wanted it. And right now, they were here for one reason. Dallas wasn't looking for a rematch. He was looking for payback. Layla exhaled slowly. She didn't let her gaze flicker, didn't show them even an ounce of what she was thinking. 4 against 1. Dallas smirked, taking a slow step forward. Big mistake coming here, he said. Layla didn't respond. She had nothing to say to him. Dallas wasn't talking because he needed to. He was talking because he thought he was still in control. She knew better, because bullies like Dallas, they only had control if you let them. And Layla Carter, she wasn't about to let them have a damn thing. Dallas moved first. It wasn't a smart move. It wasn't even a good move. It was reckless, sloppy, driven by rage instead of control. Layla had seen it before. She'd watched guys like him throw punches in parking lots, in locker rooms, outside parties when their pride got bruised. They all fought the same way, wild and desperate, swinging hard, hoping brute force would make up for what they lacked in skill. It never did. She shifted. His fist cut through empty air. He stumbled forward off balance, and she didn't hesitate. Not for a second. She ducked, pivoted, and swept his legs out from under him. Dallas hit the ground hard. Hunter lunged next. Bigger than Dallas. Slower, though. Sloppy footwork. No discipline. He came at her swinging, but Layla stepped in, too fast, too precise, dodging his punch and knocking him back with a hit that sent him sprawling. Mason was smarter. He hesitated, measuring her, trying to predict her next move. It didn't matter. Layla was already on him before he could think too hard about it. A well-placed strike, a sharp movement, another one down. Tyler was the last to go. He hadn't even made it close enough to touch her before she had him on the floor, gasping for air. And just like that, it was over. Layla stood in the center of the gym, breathing evenly, eyes locked on Dallas as he dragged himself up, humiliated. Again. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. She could see it all over his face. He had planned to teach her a lesson, to remind her and everyone else that he was still in control, that he could break anyone who dared to make him look weak. Instead, he was the one left broken. The gym was silent. No crowd this time, no witnesses, no viral videos, just them. Layla took a slow step toward him, meeting his eyes. "Don't ever touch me again." Dallas didn't answer. He couldn't. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one calling the shots, and he knew it. The next morning, Maplewood High felt different. People weren't just whispering about what had happened anymore. They were staring. Dallas Hayes had lost twice, and this time there was no video, no proof, just a cold, hard fact that spread through the school like wildfire. Layla Carter had walked into that gym alone, and she had walked out without a scratch. Dallas didn't show up to school that day, or the next. His crew kept their heads down. No smirking five, no shoving kids into lockers, no laughing at their usual table in the cafeteria. For the first time in years, Maplewood was quiet. And Layla? She was everywhere. People she had never spoken to were stopping her in the hallways. Some wanted to know. "How'd you do it? Did you train? Are you a black belt or something? You gotta teach me how to fight like that." Others just wanted to be near her, like some of that strength might rub off if they stood close enough. She should have felt good about it. She didn't. Because the truth was, this had never been about winning. It had never been about fighting back or proving a point or getting revenge. It had been about survival. Because for years, this school had operated under one simple rule. People like Dallas Hayes made the rules, and everyone else followed them. Layla hadn't just broken that rule. She had shattered it. And now everyone was left staring at the pieces, wondering what came next. She didn't have an answer for them, but she did know one thing. There were more Dallas Hayes out there, at other schools, in offices, on streets where people like her were expected to move aside and say nothing. And she knew, without a doubt, that some of them were watching, wondering if they were next. Dallas came back to school on Monday. He walked through the front doors like nothing had happened, head high, shoulders squared, the same way he always had. But everyone saw the difference. It wasn't in the way he carried himself. It wasn't in his clothes or the way his hair was styled. It was in the way people looked at him. No more wary glances. No more hushed voices. No more nervous laughter from kids who used to shrink when he walked by. The fear was gone, and in its place, something else. Something closer to pity. Dallas saw it. He felt it. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know how to fix it. Layla watched from across the hallway, where she was leaning against a row of lockers. She didn't need to say anything. This wasn't a fight anymore. It never had been. Dallas had spent years making people believe he was untouchable, that the school belonged to him, people like him, that there were rules, his rules, that everyone else had to follow. Layla hadn't just proven him wrong. She had proven that the rules had never been real in the first place. The hallways weren't his. The school wasn't his. The power had never been his. It had only ever belonged to the people who were too afraid to take it back. And now, they weren't afraid anymore. A week passed, then two. Things shifted. The school felt lighter. Not perfect, not some fairy tale ending where suddenly all the bullies disappeared and everyone learned how to be a decent human being overnight. But the balance had changed. People who used to walk with their heads down looked up. Kids who used to get shoved against lockers pushed back. And Dallas? He was still there, still sitting at his usual lunch table, still talking, still laughing, still trying to act like nothing had changed. But it had. He wasn't the same anymore, and neither was anyone else. One afternoon, Layla was walking toward the parking lot when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Dallas stood there. No crowd. No pack of guys standing behind him. Just him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, he said, "You didn't have to do that." Layla tilted her head. "Do what?" Dallas let out a slow breath, eyes flicking to the pavement. "You didn't have to ruin me." Layla didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, she hadn't set out to ruin him. She hadn't set out to prove a point. She had just wanted to exist without someone telling her she didn't belong. She could have said that. Instead, she just said, "You did that to yourself." Dallas looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, shoved his hands in his pockets, and walked away. There would always be people like Dallas Hayes at every school, every job, every street corner. People who thought power came from making others feel small. But there would also be people like Layla Carter, people who refused to shrink. And that made all the difference. Thank you for taking the time to experience this story. It's not just about one moment, one fight, or one person. It's about the power of standing up, of refusing to be silenced, of choosing courage over fear. Stories like this matter because they remind us that change doesn't come from waiting. It comes from action, from resilience, from knowing that the rules people try to enforce aren't always the ones that deserve to exist. Your support means everything. Keep sharing, keep speaking up, and most importantly, keep believing in your own strength.